We're kicking off the coverage of Gran Turismo 7's 4 cars in the October update with the Maserati Merak, in particular a Merak SS from 1980, and any who know me and who know the channel and who know the cars that I've owned in real life and driven and reviewed in Beards and Cars will know that I love Maserati. They are a brand which is deliberately different to anything else really in that kind of sphere. They're often part of the big three with Ferrari, Lambo and Maserati, but they're really the most different of the three. They're gothic, they're intriguing, they're definitely alluring in their design, but they're also often maligned for their reliability, and they're much more concerned with being engaging to drive, characterful and fun, rather than just fast or overly powerful. You will very rarely see a Maserati that is actually designed to beat a Ferrari or something like that. That's just not really what they do. In the game though, we need to put that aside for a second and consider what this car can actually do, regardless of my love and regardless of its branding. Now I will say, Maserati or not, it has a really good head start on a lot of the other classics, especially in the Hagerty collection, because this is one of the most affordable cars in the history of the Hagerty collection in this game, because it's 75,000 credits. That is dirt cheap compared to many others, even compared to the classic Skyline. To arrive alongside this is many times cheaper than that car. Now with that in mind, that could mean that the stakes are very low. So what are you actually working with? Well, the points are fairly low. 422 is very modest, about what you'd expect for like an older sports car or maybe a muscle car within GT7. It doesn't have a huge amount of power, only 216 horses, and it is also heavier than it looks at over 1400 kilos, 1420, so more like the kind of weight that you'd expect from maybe a small saloon or a hot hatch. So not really that impressive on paper. Thankfully though, much like a Lotus and other smaller classics of that ilk, what it can do with the numbers it has to work with makes it so much better than just the on-paper numbers. So 75 grand is cheap, 216 horsepower is low, 1400 kilos isn't that great, but when you actually take it out on a track, even completely stock on comfort tyres, it is immediately a pleasure to work with. It's not necessarily going to melt your brain or reinvent the wheel, but it's a really nicely driving little mid-engine classic sports car. And speaking to that point of being mid-engined, it's actually a lot less skittish or even slippery than something like a Mangusta or other classic Italian sports cars or even sports cars from around the world. Now, one of the really good things about this car is actually how much you can tune it, because you can turbo aspirate this car from the standard natural aspiration, which isn't something that you see too much crossover on in Gran Turismo. You tend to have turbo cars that can have better turbos, supercharged cars that can have better superchargers, or naturally aspirated cars that you can basically just bore out and put a better crank in, and that's about it. This is one of those rare occasions where you can turbo the car, and you can get some pretty good power out of it, up around 400 horses. So I've heard from people already that they've actually used this car for racing, even at Le Mans in the notorious Cash Cow 700 point event, and they've won the race with it. So the potential to pay for itself in literally one race is immediately there. So even just as an investment, this is already doing, let's be honest, a lot better than many other classics in Gran Turismo 7, because with so many of them being so expensive, they do tend to swing more to the collector's end of the pendulum rather than the actually good for racing end of the pendulum. Thankfully, this one kind of ticks both. It's a great collector's piece, but it's also not that expensive, and the tuning and potential is good, so you can actually win its own value back many, many times over. Now, in terms of adding my love for Maserati, of course I'm glad to see it in the game. One of the reasons why I'm kind of surprised to see it make its debut is because something like a Bora would be far more obvious. Very similar look, especially from the front, much more iconic for the most part, but as with the A6 GCS, it's great to see more Maseratis in the game. Of course, the Gran Turismo kind of had to be featured with a name like that, and it's a great car, don't get me wrong, but having only one to work with limits the appeal and limits its ability. I'm still holding out hope for maybe having one of my Quattroportes in a Gran Turismo game at some point so that other people can experience why I love the Quattroporte so much, but for now, having at least these three, well, that's 3 times better than it used to be. Overall, I would say that despite the Maserati badge, despite many people's apparent low opinion of Maserati as a brand, which I can kind of understand, more so in real life than in a game to be honest. I would actually say this one's worth your time. It's not like you're spending that much to try it. You can potentially make its money back many times over, even if you don't end up using it all the time, and it's just a really pleasant little car. It looks nice, it sounds great, the handling is very characterful and playful, and the fact that it doesn't have a huge amount of power means that, especially stock, you can have quite a pleasant time just driving it for the fun of it. You can throw it through corners like a little Lotus, and it really does a great job of not feeling anywhere near as heavy as it comparatively is given its appearance. So overall, not only is it a tick in the box for a Maserati fan like me, but it's a genuinely good little classic, a lot more useful than many of the other classics in the game in fact. So for me, definitely the standout of this update by far, and of course I'd love to hear your thoughts down below as well. Have you bought the car already? Do you love it? Do you maybe not like it, find it disappointing, or maybe somewhere in the middle, do you find it a middling car? Ultimately though, that's it for my thoughts on the Merak, and for those who are curious to hear my thoughts on the other cars in the update, of course, those will be coming out in the following days, and if you are interested in my actual Maseratis, which I owned in real life, and why I love them so much, or maybe even some of the Maseratis that I've reviewed and driven in real life, such as the Gran Turismo, then of course you can find those videos in the Beards and Cars playlist here on the channel as well. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.